Welcome back to episode 3 of Lighthouse Health and Safety Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Chandran, and today's episode will look at workplace culture and how you can build a workplace culture that you can be proud of. So the basic agenda for today is to look at what culture is, how to establish common ground between people in your organization, before we delve into some important concepts in organizational psychology. And those concepts are behaviors, values, and emotions, because you will need to understand these if you want to help forge a culture that you can be proud of. We're then going to look at how to influence people's relationships to safety through effective behavior-based safety programs, and really the basic elements of what makes an effective BBS program. And then I'm going to finish off with a little trick I use in BBS conversations, which I call the 4 R's of effective BBS conversations. So let's jump straight into the first topic. What is meant by workplace culture? Well, culture is a term that's thrown around a lot in social media and most commonly on platforms like LinkedIn. Sometimes it's used in the right context, but far too often it isn't. So let's start with the basics. What is workplace culture? Simply put, workplace culture refers to the espoused values that you observe in a workplace. In other words, observable behaviors. At a deeper level, how do those behaviors make you feel? Because what you feel is evidence of the culture. Oh, and by the way, the term safety culture is often used interchangeably with workplace culture, but it is really just another subset of workplace culture. i.e., do we value safety here? Can you observe safe behaviors? Are you feeling safe at work? Do you work for a company that has values and expects you to adopt the company values? Now, most big companies are like this, and you're often introduced to company values during your inductions. So make sure some senior line leaders are present at those inductions and talk about safety. Because first impressions count, and if they're absent, well, you have your answer regarding safety culture already. No need to dig deeper. You know, when I present safety inductions, I often talk about Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And I say that individuals don't evolve, but populations do, or communities do. Now, what I mean by this is that values are a bit like individuals with uncommon traits, uncommon characteristics. When a few people have them, they're not really noticeable in a broader population, and they won't move the needle. But when most people have them, then they become common traits or characteristics, and common behaviors ensue. This is how a common culture develops, rather than pockets of smaller subcultures. This is also why when many people talk about diversity and say, diversity is a great thing, it's wonderful, we need it, I will offer some caution. Diversity of thought can be good because it allows you to conceive things that perhaps you were not able to do on your own. But it can also be a great source of conflict. Just look at the various conflicts going on in our world today. For the most part, all those people at conflict have more in common with one another than differences, and yet they still fight and hurt the ones who are different. Which brings me to my next point. If you want to instill common values in every employee and contractor within your organization, how do you go about doing it? We now come to finding common ground. So firstly, I would look at what people have in common and base the company's values on those common attributes. Some good common values are respect, care, kindness, courage, teamwork, innovation, initiative. If you have respect, care, and kindness, you don't really need to have safety as a standalone value because it's already built in to those core values. Now, most companies that I've worked for, they've got it all wrong. Most, but not all. Those companies tell you what your values should be. Wrong, wrong, wrong. There is no respect right there. However, I did work for one company that absolutely nailed it. They got it right. Their approach was scientific. It was based on solid principles of organizational psychology. And this is what they did. Instead of telling people to adopt the company's values, they went out to their global workforce to see what their common values were. They then came back with 4: respect, integrity, teamwork, excellence. Now, I'm not a big fan of integrity as a value because it's so easy to fail the integrity test. In fact, I have a unique definition for integrity, which is there are no cracks in integrity. Because integrity is about doing the right thing, even if it hurts. And when the going gets tough, most people get going. And most companies, and I do mean most, are no different. You won't see integrity issues during good times, but when commodity prices fall and redundancies are on the horizon, you will see it. Distress has a way of bringing out the best and the worst in people. And at the end of the day, we are a fearful bunch of people. But because of that, we are also very, very predictable. Delving on. Behaviors, values, and emotions. So this brings me to an important question. If a worker engages regularly in at-risk behaviors and you want to transform their behaviors into safer ones, how do you go about doing so? Well, if a person's relationship to safety can be observed in the things they say and do, then we can make desirable, safe behaviors become the norm. It is done by influencing the worker's relationship to safety. Now, do you remember what I talked about in the last episode about influencing behavior using pleasure and pain? Well, the same thing applies here. In order to change a behavior, you must forge the values that drive those desirable, safe behaviors. And to do that requires an emotional stimulus. Because if you want to move someone, you first need to motivate them. Welcome to behaviour-based safety. Now, at their heart, behaviour-based safety programs are quite simple. You start by observing a worker going about their tasks. You see a safe behaviour or an at-risk behaviour, This creates an opportunity for you to engage the worker and have a conversation with them. You're not talking at them, you're having a conversation with them. It is a two-way street. But beware. How the worker responds will be strongly influenced by the prior relationship you have with them. I certainly do not recommend starting a behavior-based conversation as the first conversation that you've had with a person. Try to get to know them better, because as I've said in the past, people want to know that you care before they care what you know. So start with a relationship. Do you already have trust? Do you respect one another? Are you in a senior or supervisory role within that worker's reporting line? Because all of these things are going to affect the power dynamics and the conversation that you have. And if that trust and if that respect is not in place, go away, work on those first. Behavior-based safety is not for you, not this time. But assuming that you already have a relationship, then you can have a BBS conversation with that person and bring them on the journey with you. Or perhaps, and this is a great one if this happens to you, they'll bring you on a journey with them. And then you're brought into their world and you see what they see, you know what they know. It doesn't really matter who's leading who. The important thing is that you both need to be on the same boat, heading in the same direction together. Because unless you are, then you're not going to be developing a common culture. And this brings me towards the end of the episode. How do you have an effective behavior-based safety conversation? Well, I'm going to give you a bit of a formula that works for me. A quality BBS engagement has 3 or 4 main steps. I refer to this process as the 4 R's, or the 3 R's if there are 3 steps. But those 4 R's are recognize, respond, reinforce, or rectify. And this is how it will play out in sequence. Step 1, recognize. Did you observe a safe behavior or an at-risk behavior? Step 2, have a two-way conversation about what you observed. Discuss with them the safe or at-risk behavior you observed. Let the worker explain where it's coming from so you understand what's motivating their behavior. Step 3, reinforce the safe behavior, if it was a safe behavior that you observed, or rectify the at-risk behavior if you observed an at-risk behavior. Now, sometimes you will observe both a safe behavior and an at-risk behavior, and you can discuss both within the same conversation. I would always start with the safe behavior first. It sets up the tone for the remainder of the conversation. You know, a good BBS engagement should have benefit to yourself as well as the person you're observing. As I mentioned, it is a two-way street. It should give you, as the observer, some insight into the person's thinking, so that you know whether safety is front of mind. But it also allows them to think and be able to explain why they do what they do. Perhaps that conversation has created a new experience for the worker. And just to give you an example of how this might play out, I'm going to go back about maybe 10 to 12 years in my career now, when I had a conversation with an individual on a civils project. And he had these earplugs in his ears, and they weren't fitted very well. I could tell they were sticking out quite a lot. And so when I got a chance to talk to him, I said to him, I noticed that your earplugs are sticking out of your ears quite a lot, right? To me, that was an at-risk thing, right? And I wanted to understand why. So I made that comment to him. I didn't say to him, hey mate, hasn't anyone shown you how to wear a pair of earplugs, right? No, the approach was more, I can see that your earplugs are sticking out quite a bit. What's going on there? And the response was very enlightening. So what he said to me was this. He said, I can't put them in any further. Do they hurt too much? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, this is as far in as I can get them before my ears start hurting. And I said, oh, this is the first time I'd heard this. So I asked him a bit more about his earplugs, how they were selected. And he said, oh, we just get them from the storeroom. So we went to the storeroom and we had a look. So this is all part of the two-way conversation now. I've recognized an at-risk behavior. We've started a conversation. It's a two-way conversation. He says, this is how they're selected. We went to the storeroom. And I noticed that that particular company that he was working for only had one set of plugs, and they were large size. Because earplugs come in various sizes, the small, medium and large, because people's ear canals are all different sizes. And so I was explaining this to him, and I said, I think you might require either a small or a medium. He goes, but large is clearly too large for you. And then he looked at me and he goes, I had no idea. And it was a profound moment. But it was a conversation starting with an observation that resulted in a learning experience. I learned something, he learned something, and that was the end of that conversation. But it didn't really end there. I wanted to show him that I really cared. So about a week later, I gave him a call. He remembered me. And this is a really, really good indicator of a relationship, that people remember you, right? And he remembered me. And I asked him, I said, how are you going with those smaller earplugs? Were you able to, get that order through and get those purchased? And he had. Within the week, he had raised it and he'd got a result. But the point of that phone call was to show him that I cared. This is very, very important. The follow through. So if you do implement a behaviour-based safety program, don't forget the follow through. That is your opportunity to show that you care. More recently I did have another conversation which was a little bit more uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary. I was doing some work on some solar farms, and I was at one particular solar farm, and the site lead was driving me out to an inverter that had caught fire, and I was doing the investigation. And we had two other passengers in the car as well. So there were 4 people in this vehicle. And we've driven from the site office to the inverter, which is just a few minutes drive. I was sitting in the back seat, but I had the feeling that the driver wasn't wearing his seatbelt. As we got out at the destination, I just asked him sort of openly, what's the site policy around wearing seatbelts in motor vehicles. And I was honestly expecting him to say, yep, we do that. That's absolutely what we do. That's policy around here. But he surprised me when he said, we don't tend to use them. And I was not expecting that response. The problem was the conversation had occurred around the earshot of other people, and I was not expecting that response. We got back in the vehicle and head back to the side office. En route, the driver's mobile phone rang. And again, I thought, don't answer it. But he answered it, not through the hands-free system. He picked it up, put it to his ear, and had a phone conversation with his boss while we were driving. Even said to his boss on the phone that he was driving. And then we got to the office, and I made an excuse to pull him aside and to talk about something else. And then while I pulled him aside, I said, look, I noticed that you were driving, you didn't have your seatbelt on, and then you answered your mobile phone while you were driving. And he could see that, it was a serious conversation. But I said to him, look, the people that were in the car with you, you've got the safety officer here in the car with you, right? You've got another chap, a compliance person in the car with you. You've got our HR director in the car, all observing what you're doing. And I know that the others haven't raised anything, so I wanted to be the first to raise it with you. And I had a bit of a conversation with him about that. He could see where I was coming from. But I said to him as well, because he was operating in a senior capacity, I said, look, it's really important, particularly as a senior person, that you're following the rules, because, if people can see that you're doing the right thing, they're not necessarily going to look to find fault with you. But when you're not doing the right thing, then you do open yourself up and people will start to find fault. So he took that to heart. It was a good conversation, but it was one that needed to happen. It was a bit disappointing, I suppose, that the conversation was coming from me. But this is part of behaviour-based safety. Sometimes you do need to have those tough conversations. You and workers, you're not friends. You're not there as a safety professional to be someone's friend on site, okay? You are a guide, you can be a mentor, but at the end of the day, you're also there to ensure that they are safe, right? And if that means that they follow the rules, then so be it, they follow the rules. And that brings us to the end of this episode. If you implement a behavior-based safety program, it's a simple process, but over time, it will be very effective at shaping the right values. And, people will not only have a better personal relationship to safety, but they will encourage others to develop one as well. And ultimately, this is the way to develop a culture that everyone can be proud of. And that's that. We've come to the end of this episode. The next episode will delve into workplace health and safety legislation. I'll give you an overview of the intent of the legislation and how you can go about demonstrating compliance with it. But for now, be well, stay safe, and see you later.